Hello and welcome. You know the names of many gods who rule over the Forgotten Realms. You've heard of Mystra, the Lady of Mysteries. You know of Kelimver, the stern judge of the dead. Perhaps you've whispered prayers to Timora, or felt the cold touch of Shar's darkness. But among all the divine powers who watch over Toril, few inspire the pure, visceral dread that comes with speaking the name Cyric. Not because he is the most powerful, he isn't. Not because he commands the largest following, he doesn't. But because Cyric, the Prince of Lies, achieved something that should have been impossible. He was a murderer, a thief, a liar with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And yet he became a god. Not a minor deity, not some petty power clinging to existence. For a time, Cyric held dominion over murder, lies, intrigue, death, and strife simultaneously, making him one of the most dangerous entities in the entire multiverse. This is the story of how the absolute worst person you could imagine didn't just touch divinity. He seized it with bloody hands and made it his own. The tale begins not in some grand temple or mystical realm, but in the filthy streets of Gentle Keep, one of the most notoriously corrupt cities in all of Faerun. This was no gleaming metropolis of learning or culture. Gentle Keep served as the heart of the Gentarim, a mercenary organization that dealt in assassination, slavery, and every form of villainy that could turn a profit. The city sprawled along the western shore of the Moonsea, its dark towers reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. Here, in circumstances as bleak as the city itself, a child was born who would one day make even the Gentarim seem tame by comparison. You need to understand that Cyric's origins remain somewhat shrouded in mystery, which is perhaps fitting for the future god of lies. What records exist suggest he was born to a destitute prostitute in Gentle Keep, though even this detail has been questioned by scholars who study his life. Some sources claim he was later adopted by a wealthy Sembian mercantile family, which could imply he experienced both the depths of poverty and the heights of privilege, yet learned nothing from either except how to exploit both circumstances. Whatever the truth of his early childhood, by the time Cyric reached adolescence, he had fully embraced the criminal culture of Gentle Keep. The city didn't breed heroes. It bred predators, and Cyric proved himself an apex predator from his earliest days. He learned to move through shadows like a wraith, to pick locks that master craftsmen swore were unpickable, and most importantly, to lie with such conviction that people believed him even when they knew better. This last talent would prove his most valuable asset. By the time Cyric reached his teenage years, he had already killed his first victim. Not in self-defense, not in some noble cause. He murdered because it was convenient, because someone had something he wanted, or perhaps simply because he could. In Gentle Keep, this behavior didn't mark you as a monster. It marked you as ambitious. The Gentarim noticed the young man with the quick blade and the quicker tongue. They saw potential in this slim, handsome youth with dark hair and darker intentions. Cyric chose the path of the thief, but not in the romantic sense you might imagine. He wasn't some charming rogue who stole from the rich to give to the poor. He took what he wanted from whoever had it, and he killed anyone who tried to stop him. His skills developed rapidly, and the Gentarim employed him for increasingly delicate and dangerous work. During his early years as a professional criminal, Cyric operated as an assassin and infiltrator for hire. The bodies accumulated behind him like a wake of destruction. He felt no guilt, no remorse, no hesitation, where other killers might have developed some code of honor. Some line they wouldn't cross. Cyric recognized such limitations as weakness. He would kill anyone, men, women, children, elderly, innocent, guilty. It made no difference to him. The only thing that mattered was whether the job served his interests. But Cyric possessed something beyond mere skill. He had charisma. Despite being a remorseless killer, people found themselves drawn to him. He could charm his way into confidences, into homes, into hearts, only to betray that trust without a moment's hesitation. He understood people in the way a butcher understands cattle, seeing exactly where to cut for maximum effect. This made him valuable to those who employed him, though the wise among them never trusted him completely. Yet for all his success, Cyric remained mortal, bound by the same limitations as any other human. He could be wounded, could be killed, and worst of all, could be forgotten. This gnawed at him constantly. He wanted more than just gold or reputation. He wanted power that would endure, that would make him untouchable, that would elevate him above the masses he so thoroughly despised. He just didn't know how to obtain it. That ignorance would change when ambition led him to attempt one of the most audacious thefts of his criminal career. Cyric attempted to steal the Ring of Winter from a powerful tribe of frost giants. The ring was an artifact of immense power, capable of creating devastating cold and granting its wearer near immortality. It represented exactly the kind of power Cyric craved: permanent, overwhelming, transformative. The theft went catastrophically wrong. Cyric found himself trapped in the frost giant's cave, facing certain death, with no apparent means of escape. Only the arrival of another group seeking the same prize saved him from being killed. That other group was led by a mercenary fighter named Kelimver Lionsbane, a warrior from the distant land of Cormor. Kelimver came from a cursed bloodline. His family had been transformed into creatures of bestial rage whenever they performed good deeds without payment. And conversely, they found themselves blessed with supernatural ability when they acted selfishly. This curse had tormented Kelimver his entire life, making him desperate to break free from its chains. When his adventuring party attacked the frost giant's lair, also seeking the Ring of Winter, most of them died in the ensuing battle. Only Kelimver and Cyric managed to escape alive. The two men couldn't have been more different. Where Cyric reveled in cruelty, Kelimver struggled against his darker nature. Where Cyric lied as easily as breathing, Kelemver tried to maintain some form of honor despite his curse. Yet circumstances had bound them together, and Cyric recognized opportunity. Kelemver's skill in combat could prove useful, and the cursed warrior's relatively noble nature made him easy to manipulate. Cyric cultivated what appeared to be friendship, while secretly viewing Kelemver as a tool to be used and discarded when convenient. Once back in the city of Arable, the two eventually joined forces with Adon, a young cleric of Sune, the goddess of beauty and love. They took work for the local city watch, investigating criminal activity and undertaking various missions. For a time, this unlikely partnership functioned reasonably well. Cyric played his role perfectly, contributing just enough to seem valuable, while always positioning himself to benefit most from their efforts. He maintained his facade of camaraderie, of trust, all while planning how to exploit his companions when opportunity arose. Then came the Year of Shadows, 1358 Dale Reckoning, and everything changed. The gods themselves walked among mortals during what became known as the Time of Troubles, or the Avatar Crisis. The Tablets of Fate, divine artifacts that recorded the responsibilities and limitations of every deity in existence, had been stolen from the overgod Io's domain in the outer planes. These tablets were fundamental to divine order. They defined what each god could and couldn't do, maintained the balance of power among deities, and ensured stability in the cosmic hierarchy. The theft of the Tablets of Fate remains one of the most audacious crimes in all of cosmic history, and the perpetrators were none other than Bane, the god of tyranny, and Miakul, the god of death. These two dark powers had schemed to steal the tablets, believing they could use them to overthrow Io himself and remake the divine order according to their own desires. Their plot failed catastrophically. Rather than gaining ultimate power, they triggered a punishment that would reshape the pantheon and send ripples through mortal civilization for decades to come. Io's response was swift and absolute. He cast almost every god down from the heavens, forcing them to walk Toril in mortal form until the tablets could be recovered. The punishment extended to nearly the entire pantheon, guilty and innocent alike, because Io judged that the gods had collectively failed in their responsibilities. You must understand the sheer chaos this created. Gods walked the streets in mortal bodies, suddenly vulnerable to swords and arrows and magic. Divine power still existed, but it was constrained, limited, dangerous to wield. Mortals who encountered these fallen deities often died simply from being too close to such concentrated power. The fabric of reality itself began to fray. As the magical weave grew unstable without Mystra, the goddess of magic, to regulate it from her divine realm. Wild magic surges caused unpredictable effects across Faerun. Spells failed or produced entirely wrong results. magic items became unstable. The very foundation of how magic worked became unreliable, terrifying every wizard and priest who depended on supernatural power. Cyric and his companions found themselves swept up in these apocalyptic events almost immediately. In Arable, they encountered a woman named Caitlin, later revealed to be Caitlin Moonsong, who beseeched them to help free the now mortal Lady of Mysteries. Mystra had been imprisoned in Castle Kilgrave, north of Arable by Bane, who sought to use her power for his own purposes. The group agreed to attempt a rescue, though their motivations differed significantly. Adon sought to help because it was the right thing to do. Kelimver hoped that aiding a goddess might help him break his curse. Cyric went along because he understood that proximity to divine power meant opportunity. The rescue succeeded, though not without cost. They freed Mystra from Castle Kilgrave and began a journey that would take them across war-torn Faerun. But Bane pursued them relentlessly, determined to recapture the goddess of magic. The confrontation came to a head when the group reached Waterdeep, where they hoped to find sanctuary and perhaps discover the location of the Tablets of Fate. Instead, they found themselves caught in a conflict between multiple fallen gods, each pursuing their own agenda with mortal lives as mere expendable resources. At the gates of Waterdeep, Mystra attempted to enter the city, but Helm, the god of guardians, stood in her way. Io had commanded Helm to guard the entrances to celestial planes and to prevent any god from entering cities where they weren't welcome until the tablets were found. Helm had retained his full divine powers specifically for this purpose, making him one of the few deities who hadn't been diminished by Io's punishment. When Mystra tried to force her way past, Helm struck her down, killing the goddess with a single devastating blow. The death of a deity produces catastrophic effects. On midsummer of 1358 Dale Reckoning, Mystra's divine essence exploded outward in a blast of magical energy that devastated the surrounding landscape. Her power didn't simply vanish. It scattered across the region, seeking a new vessel, a new anchor in the mortal world. That anchor turned out to be a young magic user who had been traveling with the group, a woman who went by the name Midnight. Midnight's real name was Ariel Manx, and she was a mage of genuine talent and compassion who sought to use her abilities to help others. She possessed something Cyric had never experienced: actual concern for other people. She cared about justice, about protecting the innocent, about making the world better. When Mystra's divine essence merged with her, Midnight found herself transformed, carrying the power of the goddess of magic within her mortal frame. The merger was imperfect, unstable, and incredibly dangerous, but it made her one of the most powerful beings currently walking Toril. Cyric watched all of this with fascination rather than fear. Where others might have been terrified by the presence of gods made flesh, by the death and rebirth of divine power, he saw opportunity. These divine beings were vulnerable now. They could be tricked, manipulated, even killed. The rules had changed, and if Cyric excelled at anything, it was exploiting chaos for personal gain. He had already begun to understand that the time of troubles wasn't just a crisis, it was a doorway, and he intended to walk through it into godhood itself. The unlikely group, Cyric, Kelimver, Midnight now serving as Mystra's vessel, and Adon found themselves tasked with recovering the tablets of fate. Mystra needed those tablets returned to Io to end the time of troubles and restore divine order. She convinced her companions that this quest served the greater good, that saving the world required finding these artifacts. Cyric went along with the plan, but not because he cared about saving anyone. He went because he understood that proximity to such powerful forces meant opportunity for someone clever enough to seize it. Their journey took them across a landscape transformed by divine presence. They witnessed horrors that would have broken lesser people. Entire populations consumed by rogue magic. Gods battling in the streets, leaving hundreds dead as collateral damage. And the slow unraveling of civilization as people realized the gods could no longer protect them from the heavens. Throughout all of this, Cyric remained coldly calculating. He learned everything he could about the nature of divine power, about how gods drew strength from worship, about the structure of the pantheon and the rules that governed it. And he waited for the moment when he could claim divinity for himself. Standing in the chaos of a world where gods walked as mortals, Cyric made a choice that would reshape the pantheon itself. He decided he would not simply survive the time of troubles. He would not merely aid in recovering the tablets of fate. No, Cyric would do something that mortals weren't supposed to be able to do. Something that should have been impossible. He would kill gods and take their power for himself. He would ascend to divinity not through worship or divine blessing, but through murder and theft, the only skills he'd ever truly mastered. You should be ready now, ready to witness how the worst of humanity climbed over mountains of corpses to touch the face of divinity, ready to understand that sometimes the most terrible people don't get what they deserve. They get exactly what they want. Section 2. Walking Among Gods. The journey continued with renewed purpose after Mystra's death and rebirth within Midnight. Cyric's companions noticed the change in him almost immediately, though they couldn't articulate exactly what had shifted. He had always been cynical and dangerous, but now he radiated something darker, something that made even hardened adventurers uncomfortable in his presence. Kelimver watched his supposed friend with growing unease, though he couldn't bring himself to act on his suspicions. Midnight, still struggling to contain Mystra's power within her mortal frame, sensed wrongness emanating from Cyric like heat from a forge. But they needed him. They needed his skill, his knowledge of the underbelly of civilization, and his ability to survive in situations that would kill more honorable people. So they convinced themselves that his darker impulses remained under control, that their friendship and shared purpose would prevent him from doing something catastrophic. They were wrong, of course. They had always been wrong about Cyric. The quest for the Tablets of Fate led them across a landscape transformed by divine presence. In Shadowdale, they witnessed the aftermath of battles between Bane and other powers. They saw temples destroyed, priests slaughtered, and entire communities torn apart by conflicts between gods who should have been beyond mortal concerns. Everywhere they traveled, they found evidence of the gods' terrible fury unleashed upon the mortal world. Cities burned, populations fled. The social order that had existed for centuries crumbled as people realized the divine beings they worshipped were now vulnerable, fallible, and often petty. Cyric absorbed all of this like a sponge absorbing water. He studied how the fallen gods drew upon their remaining power. He observed the limitations imposed upon them by their mortal forms. He noted which deities retained significant strength and which had been weakened by the exile from the heavens. Most importantly, he began to understand the mechanism by which divine power transferred from one being to another. When a god died in their avatar form during the time of troubles, their portfolio, their divine essence, didn't simply vanish. It had to go somewhere, had to be claimed by someone or something. Throughout their travels, Cyric continued to play the role of loyal companion while planning how to use his friends when opportunity arose. He befriended Adon, the priest of Sune, gaining his trust through false displays of concern and manufactured vulnerability. He cultivated his relationship with Kelimver, always positioning himself as a reliable ally while secretly plotting betrayal. He watched Midnight's struggle with Mistress Power, studying how mortal flesh could contain divine essence without being destroyed. Every interaction, every conversation, every shared campfire became data he could use later. The group's journey eventually brought them to the city of Tantras on the shores of the Moonsea. This ancient city had become a focal point during the time of troubles because Torm, the god of duty, had manifested there to protect the population from other divine threats. Tantras had survived relatively intact compared to other cities, partly because Torm's presence deterred the worst excesses of other fallen gods. But protection came with cost. The city existed in a state of constant tension, never knowing when divine conflict might erupt in its streets. In Tantras, Cyric acquired a weapon that would change everything. The sword was called Godsbane, and it had connections to Mask, the god of thieves and shadows. The circumstances of how Cyric obtained the blade vary depending on which source you consult. But what matters is that the sword possessed extraordinary properties. It could harm divine beings in their mortal forms, cutting through protections that would turn aside ordinary weapons. More than that, it seemed to choose its wielder, granting enhanced abilities to those it deemed worthy, or at least useful. When Cyric's hand closed around Godsbane's hilt, he felt power surge through him, unlike anything he'd experienced before. The sword wanted him. It recognized in Cyric a kindred spirit, something cold and hungry, and utterly without mercy. The blade whispered to him, filling his mind with dark knowledge about the nature of divinity itself. It taught him things that mortals weren't meant to know, secrets about how gods drew strength from worship, how portfolios could be claimed, how mortality and divinity intersected during this unique period when the normal rules had been suspended. What Cyric didn't fully understand at the time was that mask had his own schemes, his own plans for surviving the time of troubles and emerging stronger. Based on what we know of divine politics, we can assume the god of thieves had crafted Godsbane with specific purposes in mind, and Cyric had just volunteered to be its instrument. But in his arrogance, in his certainty that he could control any situation, Cyric believed he was the one doing the using. He held a god-killing blade, and all around him walked gods trapped in mortal flesh. The possibilities were intoxicating. The decisive moment came at a place called Boresker Bridge, an ancient stone crossing that spanned the winding water river. This bridge held significance dating back thousands of years, a place where divine and mortal had met before in ages past. Now it would witness one of the most consequential murders in the history of Faerun. Baal, the god of murder, waited at Boresker Bridge. The Lord of Death had taken mortal form and established himself in the area, using his diminished but still considerable power to spread carnage throughout the region. Baal embodied murder itself, not as a crime or a sin, but as a fundamental force of the universe. He was death dealt by one sentient being to another, the moment when life ended through deliberate violence. For millennia, he had reveled in this role, encouraging assassination and slaughter across countless worlds. Now Baal stood before them in a mortal body, still radiating menace, but vulnerable in a way he had never been before. The confrontation was inevitable. Baal possessed one of the tablets of fate, the very artifacts that Mistra needed to end the time of troubles. The group needed that tablet, and Baal refused to surrender it. Negotiation proved impossible because Baal only understood one language, and that language was written in blood. The battle began with Baal demonstrating why even fallen gods remained terrifying opponents. He moved with impossible speed, his attacks carrying divine power that could shred mortal flesh with a touch. But Cyric carried Godsbane, and the sword howled with joy as it tasted divine essence. The blade cut through Baal's defenses, through his divine protections, through the very concept of the god of murder's invulnerability. Each wound Cyric inflicted weakened Baal further, draining his power and transferring it into the sword, into Cyric himself. You need to understand what happened in those final moments of Baal's mortal existence, as Cyric drove Godsbane into the god of murder's heart. as divine blood spilled across ancient stones. A transfer of cosmic proportions occurred. Baal's portfolio, his domain over murder and assassination, his divine spark itself, flowed from the dying god into his killer. The irony was perfect, almost poetic. The god of murder had been murdered, and by that very act, his power passed to the murderer. Cyric felt the divine essence enter him like liquid fire. It should have destroyed him, should have burned away his mortal form and left nothing but ash. Instead, his hollow soul accepted it, contained it, made room for power that had once belonged to a god. He staggered but didn't fall. He screamed but didn't shatter. And when he stood upright again, when he looked at his companions with eyes that now held a terrible light, they realized with horror what had just occurred. Their friend, their companion, had just begun his ascension to godhood, and he was only getting started. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Cyric had claimed a portion of divine power, but he wasn't yet a full deity. He existed in a state between mortal and god, more than human, but less than divine. This intermediate state gave him capabilities far beyond any mortal. Yet, he remained vulnerable to mortal weapons and mortal concerns. He could still be killed, though it would take far more than a simple blade to do it now. Kelimver confronted him immediately after Baal's death, demanding to know what Cyric intended to do with his newfound power. The cursed warrior had hoped that his friend might use divine abilities to help end the time of troubles, to restore order, to save lives. One look at Cyric's face told him otherwise. There was no compassion there, no mercy, only hunger. Hunger for more power, more divinity, more of the intoxicating strength that now flowed through his veins. Midnight tried to reach him as well, appealing to whatever remained of the man she thought she had known. She spoke of responsibility, of the opportunity to do good, of how divine power came with obligations to mortals who would worship him. Cyric listened to her words with apparent interest, nodding thoughtfully as she explained the duties of godhood. Then he laughed. It was a sound without warmth, without humanity, the laugh of someone who had just heard the most absurd joke imaginable. He had no intention of helping anyone but himself. He never had. The only surprise was that they hadn't figured that out sooner. The group fractured after Borisker Bridge. Trust, already strained, shattered completely. Kelimver couldn't bring himself to travel with someone who had just murdered a god to steal their power. Midnight needed to focus on her role as Mistra's vessel and the larger quest to recover the second tablet of fate. They went their separate ways, though their paths would cross again before the time of troubles ended. But there was more to Cyric's story during the time of troubles, another murder that would define his ascension. The details of what happened to Lara, the goddess of illusion and deception, remain somewhat unclear in historical records. What we know is that Cyric encountered Lara during the time of troubles and managed to kill her, claiming her portfolio of lies and illusion for himself. The exact circumstances, the location, the method, these details have been obscured by time and by the very nature of lies themselves. Based on what we know of Cyric's methods, we can assume he used deception to get close to Lara, perhaps claiming to be an ally or a worshipper in need. The goddess of deception would have been naturally paranoid, naturally cautious. But Cyric had always been exceptionally skilled at making people believe his lies. If anyone could deceive the goddess of deception herself, it would be him. When he struck, when Godsbane pierced divine flesh once more, Lara's portfolio flowed into Cyric just as Baal's had. But this murder had consequences beyond simply granting Cyric more power. Lara wasn't just the goddess of lies and illusion. She was deception itself, the concept made manifest, and concepts have a way of affecting those who embody them. As Cyric absorbed her power, he also absorbed the fundamental nature of untruth. From that moment forward, he would not simply tell lies. He would become inseparable from falsehood itself. Truth and lies would blur in his mind, becoming indistinguishable. He would believe his own deceptions, would be unable to recognize reality when it conflicted with what he wanted to be true. The madness had begun, though Cyric didn't recognize it yet. He only felt the intoxicating rush of increased power, the expanding awareness that came with claiming another divine domain. 2 gods dead by his hand, 2 portfolios claimed, and the time of troubles still raged across Faerun, heading toward its final confrontation. The final days of the Avatar crisis approached rapidly. Across Toril, both tablets of fate had been recovered. Midnight, still serving as Mistress Vessel, had found the second tablet and now traveled toward Waterdeep, where the gods would be judged by Io himself. The Overgod had decided it was time to end the chaos, to return the deities to their proper places, or to destroy them if they had proven unworthy. Every god still walking in mortal form felt the pull toward that final reckoning. Cyric felt it too, but unlike the others, he had no fear. He had killed gods. He had stolen their power. He had proven himself capable of surviving contact with divine essence. When Io passed judgment on the Pantheon, Cyric intended to be recognized not as a mortal who had overstepped his bounds, but as a new god who had earned his place through strength and cunning. The traditional path to divinity involved accruing worshippers over centuries, slowly building power until one's divine spark ignited. Cyric had found a faster route, one written in the blood of fallen deities. The convergence at Waterdeep became inevitable. All the major players in the time of troubles gathered there for the final confrontation. Miakul, the god of death, sought to seize ultimate power through dark rituals. Midnight prepared to fulfill her role as Mistress Vessel. Kelemver arrived hoping to somehow salvage something good from the disaster. And Cyric came carrying Godsbane, wearing the stolen portfolios of 2 dead gods, ready to claim whatever opportunities the chaos presented. The battle in Waterdeep was apocalyptic in scope. Miakul raised an army of undead and attempted to drain the life force from the entire city. Midnight channeled Mystra's full power to stop him, risking her own destruction in the process. Magic ran wild through the streets as the god of death, and the goddess of magic clashed with forces that reshaped reality itself. Thousands died in moments. Buildings collapsed. The very stones screamed under the weight of divine conflict. Cyric moved through this chaos like a shark through blood-filled water. He struck at targets of opportunity, killing when it served his purpose, hiding when it didn't. When midnight finally defeated Miakul, when the god of death's mortal form began to dissolve, fragments of his divine power escaped into the world. This could imply that Cyric managed to claim some portion of that escaping essence, though he didn't gain Miakul's full portfolio of death at this time. Then Io arrived to pass judgment. The Overgod manifested his presence in a way that made every being present, mortal and divine alike, feel insignificant beyond measure. Io exists beyond the petty concerns of individual gods. He is the framework upon which all divine reality rests, the ultimate authority over the entire cosmological structure. When he spoke, creation itself listened. Io judged the gods who had survived the time of troubles. Some he returned to their previous stations. Some he demoted for their failures during the crisis. Some he elevated for service rendered. Midnight, who had carried Mystra's essence and helped recover the tablets of fate, was raised to full godhood, becoming the new Mystra. Kelemver, who had died heroically during the conflicts, was also granted divinity, though the details of his initial divine role remain less clear in the historical record. And when Io's awareness turned toward Cyric, toward this mortal thief who had murdered gods and stolen their power, everyone expected the Overgod to strike him down, to unmake him for his presumption. Instead, Io recognized Cyric's ascension. The Overgod saw that the thief from Gentle Keep had done what no mortal should be able to do. He had claimed divine essence and survived. He had taken the portfolios of fallen gods and made them his own. By the laws that governed divine existence, by the rules written into the fabric of cosmic reality itself, Cyric had earned godhood. It didn't matter that he was a monster. It didn't matter that he deserved destruction rather than elevation. Power recognized power, and Cyric had seized enough of it to force recognition even from Io himself. In that moment, as the Overgod's judgment settled upon him, Cyric transformed completely. His mortal body burned away, replaced by a divine form that could exist simultaneously across multiple planes. His consciousness expanded to encompass awareness of his worshippers, wherever they might be. His power solidified into true godhood, no longer merely stolen fragments, but a legitimate divine spark of his own. He became Cyric, god of murder; Cyric, god of lies; Cyric, god of strife and intrigue and deception. The thief had become a god, the impossible had occurred, and the pantheon of Faerun would never be the same. Section 3. The Reign of Madness. Godhood changed Cyric, but not in the way you might expect. It didn't make him wiser or more compassionate or even more rational. Instead, divinity amplified everything that made him dangerous while stripping away the few remaining constraints that mortal existence had imposed. As a human, Cyric had been limited by physical boundaries, by the need for sleep and food, by the simple fact that he could only be in one place at one time. As a god, those limitations vanished. He could manifest anywhere his name was spoken. He could hear every prayer offered to him. He could touch the minds of his followers across vast distances. And with Lara's portfolio of lies now part of his divine nature, he found himself increasingly unable to distinguish between truth and falsehood. The early days of Cyric's godhood were marked by frantic activity. He had portfolios to manage, worshippers to cultivate, and a place in the divine hierarchy to establish. The other gods watched him with a mixture of horror and fascination. Here was a deity who had murdered his way to power, who possessed no redeeming qualities whatsoever, who embodied the worst aspects of mortal nature, elevated to cosmic proportions. Yet by the laws that governed divine existence, they couldn't simply destroy him. Io had recognized his ascension, and that recognition carried weight that transcended personal feelings about Cyric's worthiness. His initial portfolios gave him significant influence over mortal affairs. Murder was his through Baal's stolen power, making every assassination, every violent death dealt by one sentient being to another, an act that fed him divine energy. Lies and deception came from Lara, turning every falsehood spoken, every betrayal enacted, every truth concealed into a form of worship. Strife and intrigue rounded out his domains, ensuring that conflict itself served his purposes. These weren't minor areas of influence. They represented fundamental aspects of mortal behavior, acts that occurred millions of times daily across Toril and beyond. Cyric quickly discovered that being a god meant more than just having power. It meant managing that power, channeling it, using it in ways that maintained and expanded his divine influence. He needed worshippers because worship generated the divine energy that sustained deities. Without followers, a god would slowly weaken and eventually fade into nothing more than a lingering concept. This fact frustrated Cyric immensely. He had climbed to godhood to escape dependence on others. Yet he found himself relying on mortals in ways he never had as a human. His solution was characteristically brutal. If he needed worshippers, he would create them through fear and manipulation. He appeared to thieves and murderers, to assassins and liars, offering them power in exchange for their devotion. He spread lies about other gods, undermining their faiths and turning mortals toward his own worship. He encouraged strife wherever possible, knowing that conflict would eventually lead people to pray for his favor. His cult grew rapidly, attracting exactly the sort of people you would expect to worship the god of murder and lies. The early years after the time of troubles saw Cyric expanding his influence aggressively. He absorbed many of the followers who had previously worshipped Baal and Miakal, gods who had died during the Avatar crisis. These worshippers needed a new deity to serve, and Cyric eagerly accepted their prayers. He also moved to claim followers from Bane, the god of tyranny, who had also fallen during the time of troubles, though Bane would eventually return to godhood through his own means. For a time, many of his faithful turned to Cyric as the nearest equivalent. But Cyric wanted more than just influence through his portfolios. He wanted recognition, wanted the other gods to acknowledge his superiority, wanted the entire multiverse to bow before him. This desire led him to one of the most audacious schemes any deity had ever attempted. He decided to create a book, a tome of such profound magical power that anyone who read it would be forced to believe that Cyric was the greatest and most powerful god in existence. Not just a god, not even a major deity, the supreme power of the multiverse, greater than Io himself. This book became known as the Cyric, the true life of Cyric. The creation took place in 1368 Dale Reckoning, a decade after his ascension. Cyric recruited F. Saul Kembril to write it, though calling him a simple scribe understates his significance. F. Saul was a high-ranking priest in what remained of Bane's church, a man of considerable power and ambition. What F. Saul didn't fully understand was that Cyric intended the book to affect not just mortals, but gods themselves. The Cyric would be a weapon disguised as scripture, capable of dominating the very minds of divine beings. The magic woven into the Cyric pages went beyond mere enchantment. Cyric poured divine power directly into the work, infusing every word, every letter, every drop of ink with his essence. He collaborated with Mask, the god of thieves, who had originally provided Godsbane, though neither deity trusted the other. Mask contributed his own knowledge of divine manipulation, seeing in the project an opportunity to advance his own schemes. Together, they created something that shouldn't have been possible, a book that could rewrite the fundamental beliefs of anyone who read it. The Cyric contained Cyric's version of history, a completely fabricated narrative that placed him at the center of all cosmic significance. According to the book, Cyric had always existed, had orchestrated the time of troubles, had deliberately allowed other gods to think they had power when really he controlled everything. The text claimed that Cyric was the one true god, that all other deities were merely aspects of his divine consciousness, that reality itself existed only because he willed it. These weren't just lies. They were lies of such comprehensive scope that they created their own internal logic, their own self-supporting structure of false truth. The danger of the Cyric became apparent almost immediately after its completion. The first people to read it, scribes and priests who Cyric had tasked with making copies, fell completely under its spell. They became fanatical believers in Cyric's supremacy, unable to hold any thought that contradicted the book's teachings. Their minds had been rewritten, their entire understanding of reality altered to conform to the Cyric narrative. They would die for Cyric without hesitation, would commit any atrocity in his name, would spread his false gospel with the fervor of true converts. But the book's most devastating effect manifested when Cyric himself read it. You see, the god of lies had absorbed Lara's divine nature so completely that he could no longer recognize his own falsehoods. When Cyric read the Cyric, when he saw his own fabricated history laid out in magnificent prose, he believed every word. He looked at the claims of his own supremacy and thought them absolutely true. The book he had created to control others instead enslaved him, trapping him in a prison of his own lies. This was when Cyric's madness truly began. He had always been cruel, vicious, and self-serving, but he had also been rational in his own twisted way. Now, infected by the Cyric delusions, he lost even that limited rationality. He began to believe he was the supreme power of the multiverse, that the other gods existed only at his sufferance, that he could do anything without consequence. His actions became increasingly erratic, his schemes more grandiose and less grounded in divine reality. The other gods recognized the threat immediately. A delusional deity who believed himself supreme over all creation was dangerous beyond measure. Cyric began attacking other gods directly, trying to absorb their portfolios and eliminate what he saw as competition for his rightful place as the one true power. He targeted Kelimver, his former companion who had also ascended to godhood during the time of troubles, and now served as the god of the dead alongside Cyric. Kelimver had become everything Cyric was not. The former mercenary, freed from his curse by death and subsequent resurrection as a deity, used his power to create a fair and just afterlife. He judged souls based on their actions in life, sending the virtuous to pleasant afterlives and the wicked to appropriate punishment. He brought order and meaning to death, transforming it from an ending into a transition. His realm, the city of the dead, served as a place where souls received judgment before moving to their final destinations. Cyric found this intolerable. Death should be terrifying, should be an ending without hope or meaning. Kelimver's compassionate approach to the dead undermined everything Cyric believed murder should represent. The god of murder wanted people to fear death, to see it as ultimate defeat. Instead, Kelimver offered them hope, offered them justice, offered them the possibility of peace. The theological conflict between them erupted into open warfare. Their battles took place across multiple planes of existence, divine conflicts that shook the foundations of reality. Cyric manifested armies of his most fanatical followers, mortals who had read the Cyric and now believed him invincible. Kelimver called upon the souls of the righteous dead who had earned places in celestial realms. Divine power clashed with divine power, murder against judgment, chaos against order. Neither could gain decisive advantage because both had legitimate claims to aspects of death. The conflict escalated to the point where other deities had to intervene. The battles between Cyric and Kelimver were causing collateral damage across the planes, destroying souls caught in the crossfire and threatening the stability of the afterlife itself. Mystra, reborn in her goddess form after Midnight's transformation, worked to contain Cyric's power. Agma, the god of knowledge, recognized the danger posed by the Cyric and began working on a counter to its influence. The entire pantheon recognized that something had to be done about the mad god before he destroyed everything. But Cyric had allies of his own, or at least beings who found his chaos useful. Shar, the ancient goddess of darkness and loss, saw opportunity in Cyric's madness. She approached him with offers of partnership, with promises of mutual support against their enemies. Shar was one of the oldest powers in existence, a primal deity who had existed since the beginning of creation. She understood manipulation on a cosmic scale, and she recognized that Cyric, for all his delusions, could be aimed like a weapon against her own enemies. Shar's relationship with Cyric was complex and multi-layered. She didn't actually believe in his supremacy, didn't think him the one true god the Cyric had claimed, but she encouraged those delusions, fed them, used them to direct his rage toward targets she wanted eliminated. She whispered in his divine consciousness, suggesting strategies and targets, always framing her advice in ways that reinforced his belief in his own superiority. Cyric thought he was using Shar. Shar knew she was using Cyric. The truth, as always with gods, was probably more complicated than either of them understood. The situation came to a head in 1369 Dale Reckoning, just a year after the Cyric creation. A coalition of gods had formed, working together to break Cyric's delusion and reclaim the stability he threatened. Mask, Kelimver, Mystra, Torm, and Agma all cooperated in a complex scheme that involved Cyric's own high priest, Saul Kembril. Agma had created a countertext called The True Life of Cyric, an accurate historical account that contradicted the fabrications in the Cyric. The plan required getting both books before Cyric simultaneously, forcing him to confront truth and lies at the same moment. Through manipulation and divine intervention, they succeeded. Cyric found himself reading the true life of Cyric while still under the influence of the Cyric. The conflicting narratives created a crack in his delusion, just enough doubt to weaken him at a critical moment. In the chaos that followed, Cyric destroyed Godsbane, the sword that had been his instrument of ascension. This act freed Kelemver's soul, which Mask had been hiding within the blade for his own purposes. The destruction of the sword and the revelation of truth combined to strip Cyric of the death portfolio entirely. Kelemver claimed it, becoming the sole god of the dead. Cyric retained murder, lies, and intrigue, but the loss of death significantly diminished his power and influence. Io himself intervened, convening a tribunal of greater deities to judge Cyric's actions. The mad god stood accused of violating divine law, of attacking other gods without provocation, of threatening the stability of the entire pantheon. His defense, such as it was, centered on the claim that he had been insane, driven mad by the Cyrenishad's influence. The argument had merit. The book had indeed robbed him of rational thought, had made him believe things that were demonstrably false. The tribunal found him guilty, but recognized the mitigating factor of insanity. They allowed him to keep his divine status, acknowledging that stripping him of godhood entirely would create problems of its own, but they imposed strict limitations. Cyric would retain only murder, lies, and a reduced portion of intrigue. He would be watched, constrained, prevented from ever again reaching the heights of power and madness he had briefly attained. This marked the beginning of Cyric's imprisonment, though the full constraints wouldn't be imposed until later. He had been humbled, diminished, forced to confront that he was not the supreme power he had believed himself to be. The Cyrenishad still existed, and copies of it continued to cause problems. But Cyric himself had been partially freed from its influence by reading Ogma's true account. He was saner than he had been, though sanity for Cyric was still a relative concept. Yet the mad god was not finished making trouble for the pantheon. His greatest crime, his most devastating act of divine murder, still lay in the future. And when it came, when Cyric struck at the very foundation of magic itself, the consequences would reshape the world in ways that made even the time of troubles seem minor by comparison. Section 4. Prisoner of the Supreme Throne. The years following Cyric's loss of the death portfolio saw him diminished, but not defeated. He retained murder, lies, and a portion of intrigue, portfolios that ensured a steady stream of worship from the worst elements of mortal society. His divine realm shifted during this period, relocating to the plane of pandemonium, a place of howling winds and endless chaos that suited his fractured nature perfectly. There he established what he called the Castle of the Supreme Throne, though the structure was more accurately described as the Shattered Keep, a twisted reflection of his damaged divinity. The realm itself existed in a state of constant flux, reshaping according to Cyric's delusions and paranoid fantasies. Grand palaces rose from nothing, then crumbled when Cyric forgot he had created them. The architecture made no logical sense, with stairs leading nowhere, doors opening into voids, and rooms that changed dimensions when observed. This could imply that the realm reflected not just Cyric's madness, but also the fundamental nature of lies themselves. Nothing solid, nothing trustworthy, everything subject to change without warning. Yet for all his diminishment, Cyric retained his cunning. He understood that direct confrontation with the greater powers had failed him before. The tribunal had judged him, stripped him of portfolios, and made clear that the Pantheon would not tolerate another attempt at the kind of dominance he had briefly achieved. So instead of raging against his limitations, Cyric adapted. He became patient in ways that would have shocked those who knew him as a mortal. He began planning schemes that might take decades or even centuries to bear fruit. His clergy became his primary tools in these efforts. The Church of Cyric had survived multiple crises, though it remained fractured and prone to internal violence. Those who worshipped the Prince of Lies were themselves liars, murderers, and betrayers, making cohesive organization nearly impossible. Feuds between factions were common, particularly between those who had originally followed Baal, Miakul, or Bane before those gods' deaths, and those who had come to Cyric's worship after his ascension. Trust was not in great supply among adherents of the Dark Sun. But this very chaos served Cyric's purposes. His priests spread across Faerun like a disease, establishing hidden temples, infiltrating other organizations, and working to advance their god's agenda. They could not build grand cathedrals or hold public ceremonies without inviting suppression from local authorities. So they operated in shadows, in catacombs beneath cities, in abandoned buildings on the edges of civilization. And from these hidden places, they spread murder and lies with religious fervor. Throughout the late 1300s and early 1400s Dale reckoning, Cyric worked to maintain his influence while carefully avoiding actions that might provoke another divine tribunal. He encouraged conflicts without making his involvement obvious. He spread lies that undermined other gods' worship without attacking those deities directly. He cultivated specific mortal followers, individuals of particular talent or position who might someday serve larger purposes. All the while, he seethed with resentment toward those he blamed for his diminishment. Chief among those he resented were Mystra and Kelimver, his former companions who had also achieved godhood during the time of troubles. Mystra, once the mortal woman Midnight who had traveled with him and even held affection for him, now ruled over magic itself from her divine realm of Tuiomerheart. She had become one of the most important deities in the Pantheon because magic permeated every aspect of existence. Without Mystra to maintain the weave, the fundamental structure through which magic flowed, reality itself would become unstable. Kelimver, the cursed warrior who Cyric had once called friend, now served as sole god of the dead. He judged every soul that died, sending them to appropriate afterlives based on their mortal actions. He offered mortals something Cyric found intolerable: hope that death was not an ending, but a transition, justice existed beyond mortal life. The theological opposition between them remained as sharp as ever, though Kelimver had proven himself capable of defending his portfolio against Cyric's schemes. Cyric hated them both with the intensity only a mad god could muster. He believed they had conspired to strip him of power, that they had manipulated events to diminish him, that they existed as obstacles to his rightful supremacy. These beliefs were only partially true, twisted by his nature as the god of lies, until he could no longer distinguish his paranoid fantasies from reality. But true or false, his hatred was real, and it festered within his divine consciousness like an infected wound. Shar, the ancient goddess of darkness and loss, recognized opportunity in Cyric's resentment. She had used him before during his period of Cyranishad-induced madness, and she saw no reason not to use him again. Shar had her own reasons for wanting Mystra destroyed. The goddess of magic maintained the weave, but there existed a counterpart structure called the shadow weave that Shar controlled. If Mystra died, if the weave collapsed, Shar could perhaps supplant it with her shadow weave and gain unprecedented control over magic itself. So Shar approached Cyric with whispered suggestions, with carefully crafted provocations, with promises of revenge against those who had wronged him. She didn't need to push hard. Cyric already wanted Mystra dead. He already dreamed of striking back at the goddess, who represented everything he despised: order, stability, creation itself. Shar simply provided him with opportunity and perhaps assistance in bypassing whatever protections normally safeguarded the Lady of Mysteries. The conspiracy unfolded slowly, carefully, with both gods understanding that this would be perhaps the most consequential act of divine violence since the time of troubles. Mystra was not simply another deity. She was fundamental to how reality functioned. Her death would create cascading consequences that neither Cyric nor Shar could fully predict. But Cyric, consumed by madness and hatred, didn't care about consequences, and Shar, playing her own long game, believed she could control whatever chaos resulted. On the 29th day of Tarsak, in 1385 Dale Reckoning, Cyric murdered Mystra. The details of how he managed this feat, how he bypassed her defenses, how he struck down one of the most powerful deities in the pantheon, remain somewhat unclear. What we know is that Shar aided him significantly, that the murder took place in Dweomerheart itself, Mystra's own divine realm, and that the goddess of magic died for the third time in her various incarnations. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The weave that Mystra had controlled and maintained burst like an overstressed rope. The shadow weave, its dark counterpart, also unraveled without these structures to channel and regulate magical energy. Raw magic exploded across the cosmos in what became known as the Spell Plague. Arcane spellcasters went mad or died as the magic they had relied upon turned chaotic and unpredictable. Divine magic faltered as gods struggled to maintain their powers through collapsing metaphysical structures. The spell plague transformed Toril itself. Entire regions vanished or were displaced. The continent of Mastica disappeared, replaced by a landmass called Return to Bear that had been separated from Toril since the dawn of creation. The Underdark collapsed in many places, killing countless drow and other subterranean races. Blue flames, raw magical energy given visible form, spread across the landscape, consuming everything they touched. The catastrophe lasted for a decade, a period called the Wailing Years, during which civilization teetered on the edge of complete collapse. Cyric had achieved his revenge. He had struck down Mystra, had proven he could still kill gods, had demonstrated that even diminished, he remained dangerous beyond measure. But if he expected this act to restore his power or elevate his status, he was soon disappointed. The other gods were horrified by what he had done. Even evil deities recognized that killing Mystra had endangered the entire cosmological structure. The spell plague threatened not just mortals, but gods themselves. As the collapse of magical infrastructure destabilized divine realms across multiple planes, Io himself intervened once again. The overgod who had recognized Cyric's ascension, who had allowed him to keep his godhood after the Cyrenishad incident, now judged that Cyric had gone too far. Murdering Mystra wasn't simply an act of divine violence. It was an attack on the fundamental order of reality. The consequences of that attack were still unfolding across Toril and beyond, and they would continue for a century. The sentence was severe. Cyric would be imprisoned in his own divine realm, the supreme throne, for 1,000 years. Not simply constrained or limited as he had been before, but truly imprisoned, locked away where he could hear prayers, but could barely answer them, where he could perceive the mortal world, but could not touch it. Barriers were woven around his realm, not by a single god, but by the collective will of the greater powers, making escape effectively impossible. The imprisonment began immediately. Cyric found himself trapped within the constantly shifting architecture of his own realm, surrounded by manifestations of his madness, with no ability to project his power outward. He could still grant spells to his clergy, though his ability to do so was severely limited. Based on what we know from divine mechanics, this suggests his priests could only access lower-level divine magic, enough to keep his worship alive, but not enough to make his church a significant threat. His faithful struggled without clear direction from their God. The Church of Cyric, already prone to internal conflict, fractured further as different factions interpreted their god's imprisonment in various ways. Some believed it a test that Cyric wanted them to free him through their own efforts. Others saw it as temporary setback that would soon be reversed. Still others wondered if perhaps Cyric had been abandoned by divine favor entirely. though speaking such doubts aloud in Cyric's churches was a quick way to die. The imprisonment changed divine politics significantly. With Cyric removed from active participation, other gods could operate without constantly worrying about his schemes. Kelimver consolidated his control over death, no longer needing to defend his portfolio against attacks from his former friend. A new Mistra eventually arose, reconstituted from the fragments of her predecessor's divine essence. Though the process took decades, the weave was slowly repaired, magic stabilized, and the spell plague's most devastating effects gradually subsided. But Cyric remained, locked in his prison realm, his consciousness trapped with only his own madness for company. You might think this would break him, that 1,000 years of isolation would destroy even a god's sanity. But Cyric had already been mad. The imprisonment simply gave his madness new focus. He plotted, schemed, and planned, knowing that 1,000 years was nothing to an immortal being. One day his sentence would end. One day he would be free, and when that day came, he would make everyone pay for daring to imprison him. From within the supreme throne, Cyric continues to whisper to his faithful through dreams and visions, though his voice is faint and often garbled. He studies the mortal world through the prayers sent to him, gathering information, identifying weaknesses, preparing for an eventual release that may still be centuries away. His church persists, diminished but enduring, keeping his name alive through acts of murder and deception that feed him tiny amounts of divine power. The Prince of Lies sits on his throne of madness and waits. He has learned patience because he has no other choice. And in that patience lies perhaps his greatest danger, because a patient God with nothing to lose and everything to gain is a threat that never truly fades. Cyric's story is not over. His imprisonment has merely paused it, creating a dark anticipation of what might happen when the bars of his cage finally fall away. Section 5. The Dark Sun's Eternal Shadow. The faithful of Cyric call themselves many things depending on region and circumstance. Some use the title Dark Sun, taken from one of their gods' epithets. Others refer to their organization simply as the Church of Cyric, though calling it a church implies structure and hierarchy that doesn't always exist. The truth is that Cyric's worship has always been fractured, divided, prone to internal conflict that mirrors the god's own nature. His priests murder each other as readily as they murder outsiders. His temples become battlegrounds where different factions compete for divine favor. The chaos is intentional, or at least accepted, because Cyric himself embodies discord. You need to understand that worshiping the Prince of Lies requires a particular psychological profile. Most people, even evil people, want their gods to offer something beyond mere power. They want protection, prosperity, victory over enemies, or at least the comfort of belonging to something greater than themselves. Cyric offers none of these things. His promises are always lies. His blessings come with terrible costs. His favor is capricious and often fatal. To worship him means accepting that you might be betrayed at any moment, that your devotion might be rewarded with destruction, that the God you serve views you as completely expendable. So why does anyone worship him at all? Because some mortals see in Cyric a reflection of their own nature. Assassins who kill without remorse recognize a kindred spirit in the god of murder. Liars who have built entire lives on deception understand his portfolio on an intimate level. People who thrive in chaos, who want to watch civilization burn, find in Cyric a deity who shares their destructive impulses. His worship attracts the damaged, the cruel, and the genuinely insane, creating congregations that would horrify any observer who valued human life or dignity. The Church of Cyric operates primarily through hidden temples and secret cells. Open worship of the Prince of Lies is illegal in most civilized nations because his faith explicitly encourages murder, lying, and the destruction of social order. His priests cannot build grand cathedrals or hold public ceremonies without inviting immediate suppression from local authorities. Instead, they gather in catacombs beneath cities, in abandoned buildings on the edges of settlements, in wilderness shrines far from law and order. These hidden spaces become sanctuaries for those who serve darkness, places where the murder of innocents can be planned and lies can be refined into weapons. The rituals practiced by Cyric's faithful would revolt you if you witnessed them directly. They involve sacrifices, sometimes of animals, but often of sentient beings. They incorporate lies spoken as prayers, deliberate inversions of truth that honor their god's portfolio. They celebrate murder as holy sacrament, with each killing dedicated to Cyric's glory. The most devout priests create elaborate deceptions that destroy lives and relationships, viewing successful lies as offerings more valuable than any material sacrifice. In their theology, the greatest act of worship is to kill someone who trusts you, combining murder with betrayal in a way that feeds both of Cyric's primary domains. Yet for all their devotion to chaos, Cyric's clergy maintains certain traditions that have persisted across centuries. They use his symbol, a white, jawless skull on a black or purple sunburst, to identify themselves to fellow worshippers. They preserve texts that record their god's history, though these documents are always colored by lies and self-aggrandizement that make separating truth from fiction nearly impossible. They train new initiates in the arts of assassination and deception, passing down techniques that have been refined over generations. The Church of Cyric is paradoxically organized in its commitment to disorder. The hierarchy within the church reflects Cyric's own nature. There is no single leader, no grand patriarch or matriarch who commands all followers. Instead, different factions compete for influence, with the strongest or most cunning rising to positions of local power. These factional leaders, often bearing titles like Dreadmaster or Nightbringer, command respect through fear rather than legitimate authority. They maintain power by being more ruthless, more deceptive, and more favored by Cyric than their rivals. When one leader shows weakness, others immediately move to kill and replace them. The church cannibalizes itself constantly, yet somehow survives because new recruits arrive regularly to replace the dead. Special ceremonies mark important events in Cyric's faith. Whenever a temple acquires something or someone important enough to be sacrificed, its high priest declares a day of the dark sun to signify the holiness of the event. Eclipses are considered especially holy, being accompanied by feasts, fervent prayers, and bloody sacrifices. During these celestial events, Cyric's faithful believe their god's power reaches its peak, that the darkening of the sun represents Cyric's dominion over all light and life. Some regions have proven more receptive to Cyric's worship than others. The nation of Am, for instance, has historically tolerated the Church of Cyric to a degree that most civilized lands do not. This tolerance comes not from any particular love of murder or lies, but from Am's mercantile culture, which values gold above morality. Cyric's priests in Am operate more openly than elsewhere, establishing temples that disguise themselves as legitimate businesses or charitable organizations. They spread their poison through Amnian society, corrupting merchants, influencing politics, and ensuring that lies become so common that truth becomes impossible to distinguish. Waterdeep holds special significance for Cyric's faithful. The city witnessed his ascension to godhood at the end of the time of troubles, making Mount Waterdeep a sacred site for those who worship the dark sun. Fanatic devotees make regular pilgrimages to Waterdeep, though they must do so in secret because the city's authorities actively suppress Cyric's worship. They gather at the spot where Cyric achieved divinity, offering prayers and sacrifices to commemorate the moment when their god proved that murder and lies could elevate even the worst mortal to divine status. Cyric's influence on Faerunian history extends far beyond his direct worship. His portfolios of murder and lies mean he touches nearly every significant event involving violence or deception. Political assassinations that change the course of nations feed him divine energy even when the killers don't worship him consciously. Wars fought on false pretenses, campaigns justified by lies, conflicts sparked by manufactured grievances all fall under his domain. He is present in every betrayal, every broken promise, every moment when someone chooses falsehood over truth or violence over peace. The time of troubles itself stands as Cyric's most significant impact on history, though his role as catalyst was largely accidental. He didn't plan the Avatar crisis or engineer the theft of the Tablets of Fate, but he seized the opportunities that chaos presented with ruthless efficiency, murdering his way to godhood and forever altering the divine landscape of Toril. The pantheon before the time of troubles and after are fundamentally different, and much of that difference traces back to Cyric's ascension. Baal, ancient god of murder, was erased from existence. Lara, the lady of deception who had held her portfolio since time immemorial, was destroyed. Even Miakul, one of the dead three who had dominated evil worship for centuries, fell during the crisis. Cyric's rise was built on a foundation of deicide. His conflict with Kelimver reshaped how mortals understand death itself. Before Cyric's brief control of the death portfolio, before Kelimver's ascension to replace him, the afterlife operated under different principles. Miakul's reign as god of death had been cold and nihilistic, viewing death as an ending without meaning or hope. Kelimver's fair judgment came partly as reaction to Cyric's cruelty, a conscious choice to make death meaningful rather than terrifying, the modern understanding of death as transition rather than ending, as judgment rather than oblivion, exists partly because Cyric's tenure as death god was so horrific that the pantheon united to prevent it from ever happening again. The spell plague of 1385 Dale Reckoning represents Cyric's most devastating impact on Toril. His murder of Mystra didn't just kill a goddess. It shattered the fundamental structure through which magic flowed. The decade of chaos that followed, the Wailing Years, killed millions and transformed the world in ways that are still felt centuries later. Entire nations disappeared or were displaced. Land masses shifted. The very geography of Toril changed because one mad god wanted revenge on a former companion. Based on what we know of the spell plague's effects, we can assume countless smaller tragedies unfolded during that period. Families torn apart, communities destroyed, knowledge lost forever. The murder of Mystra created ripples that touched every corner of existence, proving that a single act of divine violence could reshape reality itself. Cyric achieved his revenge, but at a cost measured in civilizations. The theological implications of Cyric's existence trouble even scholars who study divine philosophy professionally. His ascension proves that godhood doesn't require virtue, that the most terrible person imaginable can achieve divinity through sufficient ambition and ruthlessness. This contradicts comforting narratives about cosmic justice, about good triumphing over evil, about the universe having inherent moral structure. Cyric demonstrates that power, not righteousness, determines divine status. He reached godhood not because he deserved it, but because he wanted it badly enough to murder anyone who stood in his way. His continued existence poses difficult questions for those who worship good-aligned deities. If the gods are truly good, truly powerful, why do they allow Cyric to persist? Why not destroy him completely rather than merely imprisoning him? The answer involves complex divine politics and the rules governing godhood that even theologians struggle to fully understand. Gods cannot simply unmake each other without consequence. The stability of the entire pantheon depends on certain fundamental agreements, including the principle that deities who have achieved legitimate divine status cannot be casually erased. Cyric earned his godhood through the mechanisms that govern Ascension, twisted and horrible as his path was. The other gods can limit him, can constrain him, can make his existence as difficult as possible. But complete destruction would require violating principles that keep the entire divine structure stable. This could imply that divine law exists above even the gods themselves, that there are rules woven into cosmic reality that cannot be broken without unraveling everything. Some scholars argue that Cyric serves a necessary cosmic function despite his evil nature. They suggest that murder and lies are fundamental aspects of mortal existence, that denying their divine representation wouldn't eliminate them, but would make them harder to understand and combat. By having a god who embodies these dark impulses, the pantheon creates a target for opposition, a focus for efforts to combat murder and deception. This argument remains controversial, particularly among those who have lost loved ones to Cyric's faithful or suffered from the lies his priests spread. His relationship with other evil deities provides insight into how darkness operates within the divine hierarchy. Cyric has no real allies because his nature makes genuine alliance impossible. Even Shar, who has worked with him on multiple occasions, views him as a tool rather than a partner. Bane, reborn after his death during the time of troubles, sees Cyric as a rival whose portfolios overlap uncomfortably with tyranny and fear. The evil gods tolerate him because they must, but none of them trust him or welcome his presence at divine gatherings. Good-aligned deities view Cyric with a mixture of disgust and concern. Tyr, Lathander, and Sune worked together to imprison him after he murdered Mystra, demonstrating rare cooperation between powers that don't always see eye to eye. Their willingness to unite against Cyric speaks to how dangerous they consider him, how fundamental the threat he represents. They understand that his madness makes him unpredictable in ways that even other evil gods are not. The current status of Cyric's imprisonment remains a subject of divine concern. He was sentenced to 1,000 years of confinement in his realm, the supreme throne, beginning in 1385 Dale reckoning. This means his imprisonment should last until 2385 Dale reckoning, still centuries in the future by current reckoning. The barriers holding him were crafted by Lathander, Tyr, and Sune, specifically to prevent him from directly interacting with other gods, while also serving as message to the pantheon about what behavior will be tolerated. Yet imprisonment doesn't mean powerlessness. Cyric can still grant spells to his clergy, though his ability to do so is severely limited by his confinement. His priests operate with reduced divine support, accessing only lower levels of magic, but they remain active across Faerun. They spread his worship through their actions, feeding him divine energy through every murder committed in his name, every lie told in his service. The Prince of Lies remains relevant because mortals continue to kill and deceive each other, ensuring his portfolios find constant expression in the world. His clergy's activities in recent years suggest preparation for something significant, though what exactly remains unclear. They gather artifacts, position followers in influential locations, execute schemes that follow no obvious pattern. These actions imply direct divine guidance, suggesting that despite his imprisonment, Cyric maintains enough contact with his faithful to execute complex strategies. Some divine scholars worry that these seemingly random activities might be pieces of a much larger scheme, one that won't become apparent until it's too late to counter. The question of what would happen if Cyric escaped his prison keeps divine councils occupied during periods of crisis. An unrestricted Prince of Lies, having learned patience and cunning from centuries of imprisonment, would be far more dangerous than the impulsive god who was first confined. He would know his enemy's tactics, would understand the mechanisms used to contain him, would have developed countermeasures for every defensive strategy the Pantheon employed. His first actions after escape would likely focus on reclaiming lost portfolios, particularly death, which would give him enough power to resist immediate re-imprisonment. Yet for all the fear and concern surrounding Cyric, for all the damage he has caused and continues to cause, there is something almost tragic about his story. He achieved the impossible, became a god through will and violence alone, reached heights that mortals are never supposed to reach. And what did that achievement bring him? Isolation, imprisonment, universal hatred. The power he craved turned out to be a cage more confining than any mortal prison. He rules over murder and lies, domains that ensure he will never be loved, never be truly worshipped in the sense that other gods experience worship, never find satisfaction in his divine existence. But perhaps that interpretation grants him too much humanity, too much capacity for regret or self-awareness. Cyric likely feels no tragedy in his circumstances. He probably views his imprisonment as a temporary setback, his isolation as proof of his enemy's fear, his hatred as recognition of his power. The Prince of Lies lies to himself most effectively of all, convinced even now that he is supreme, that he is destined for greatness, that eventual triumph remains inevitable. His delusions protect him from despair, while also ensuring he will never understand why those delusions make him pitiable rather than feared. The dark sun continues to cast his shadow across Toril, touching every murder, every lie, every moment of betrayal with his divine presence. Mortals who have never heard his name serve him unknowingly when they choose violence over peace or falsehood over truth. His worship persists in the darkness of hidden temples and the privacy of evil hearts. And from his prison realm, he watches and waits and plans, convinced that eventually the cosmic order will shift in ways that favor his escape. Whether that conviction is justified or simply another lie he tells himself remains unknown. But as long as mortals kill and deceive each other, as long as his portfolios find expression in the world, Cyric endures. The thief from Gentle Keep, who murdered his way to godhood, has become eternal, trapped by his own success in a prison of divine making. His sentence has centuries remaining before completion, time enough for the world to change in ways none can predict. Perhaps when his 1,000 years expire, Toril will have evolved beyond the need for gods of murder and lies. Perhaps new powers will have risen to claim his portfolios, or perhaps Cyric will emerge exactly as dangerous as he was when first imprisoned, having spent centuries planning revenge on a cosmic scale. You have witnessed now the complete arc of one of the most disturbing ascensions in divine history. From mortal monster to imprisoned god, Cyric's journey reveals truths about power, ambition, and the costs of achieving the impossible. His story serves as warning and fascination both, demonstrating that getting what you want might be the worst curse imaginable. The Prince of Lies achieved divinity and found only emptiness. The dark sun rose to illuminate nothing but his own madness. And somewhere in a prison woven from the will of greater powers, he continues to believe that his story isn't finished, that redemption or revenge or triumph still awaits him in a future only he can see. The impossible ascension of Cyric proves that in the Forgotten Realms, even the worst among us can touch divinity if we're willing to pay the price. Whether that price is worth paying, whether godhood gained through murder and lies holds any real value, these questions remain for you to ponder as you consider the dark legacy of the Prince of Lies. If you found this journey through Cyric's impossible ascension enlightening, if you appreciate the deep exploration of one of the Forgotten Realms' most complex and troubling deities, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps create more content like this, more deep dives into the lore that makes the realms such a rich and fascinating setting. Thank you for listening, and may your own ambitions lead you to better ends than they led the Prince of Lies.